Hey everyone, welcome back to Citywide Bytes. I hope you enjoyed our first episode of 2025 with author LJ Cohen, and we're keeping things going with the writers. My next guest is going to be part of the upcoming Shapers of Worlds Volume 5. It's an anthology of sci-fi and fantasy stories out in March through Shadowpaw Press, which I gotta say is an awesome name for a publishing company. Their look as a cat is friggin' amazing. Joining me is author Jeffrey Gardner. Jeffrey, welcome to the show, man. Great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Max. I'm really excited to be able to talk about this short story.
All right. Well, let's start with that. So your story is called Magic That Cannot Be Undone. I love that title, by the way. It's really cool. What is this one all about?
Sure. So this is an origin story of sorts. So the two novels that are previously published are about a wizard and kind of his trials and tribulations making his way throughout this fantasy world that I've created. And the short story is really the origin, how he got into becoming a wizard. He starts out not with magical abilities. How does he gain them? What is the entrance exam, so to speak? And how does the risks and costs of being a wizard affect him? And so all of those kind of things blend into the story.
I love a good origin story. What made you decide to actually do this?
I've been thinking about the origins of this particular character. So his name is Thorn. He's the main character of the two novels, and the younger version of him is the main character of the short story. I was thinking about, okay, what would make someone want to be a wizard? And so normally when you think about wizards, you think about stuff you see in movies and TV, and there are these cool, awesome characters that can do all sorts of rad magic and shoot fireballs and fly and do all this awesome stuff. In the world that I've created, being a wizard is not awesome. It's actually a very costly in terms of what is the trade-off. And so I was trying to think of what does it mean to be a wizard? What are you giving up to have your magical ability? And in the world that I've created, there's a chronic disease called the Iron Bane, and it essentially destroys the five senses of a person with magical abilities, and it's ultimately fatal. And so there's this fatal chronic disease to be a wizard. Why would you want to be one? That seems like
Good question.
a really bad deal. And so the story in the Shapers of World anthology is about a young Thorn. What is his motivation? Why does he want to be a wizard, knowing fully well it will destroy his five senses and kill him? And so that getting into what does it mean to be a wizard? Why would you want to do this? Understanding kind of the full responsibility of being a wizard. And so that's where the title comes from. Magic That Cannot Be Undone. Basically, once he decides he wants to gain this magical ability, he's giving up the ability to be healthy and normal. Why does he want to do
Wow.
that? And obviously, I've kind of given the spoiler away. He chooses to become a wizard because that's, so the novels can happen. But what about other members of the cohort? So he's not the only one wanting to do this. When he's going through these exams and going through these interviews and seeing what does it really mean to be a wizard, how does that affect him and other initiates, so to speak? And that's what the story is.
That's a very cool story because you're right. Like I think in some like sci in some fantasy stories, the wizard is always just there. They're there and they can do magic and they always can. And there's never really a look at okay, but how did they get there? Something had to happen. So I like that. You know, not only are we getting to see Thorn on his very early journey, but yeah, the cost. Wow, that's a hell of a motivation.
Yeah, and
Wow.
that's what I like. And you pointed it out. So just to kind of pull tropes from contemporary media, when you think of Gandalf has always had powers and he can always do stuff. And when you need something to happen, Gandalf can do it. Harry Potter, he always innately had this ability. He just had to learn the words and the wand movements and stuff like that. But in both of those cases, you say the words, you do the motions, you do the thing, the magic happens. But where's the trade-off? What's the cost? What have you given up? There's no, again, kind of pulling from other media. If you think from Full Metal Alchemist, the anime, the idea of equivalent
Yes.
exchange, right? You have to give up something of equal value to get the thing you want. And so that's what I'm trying to think of. And again, kind of from the novels and the short story, what's this idea of cost and trade-off? There needs to be something given up to get something of equal or greater value.
Yeah, this reminds me of a line that I think I heard in either DC Comics or Marvel, but in relation to like their mages, is that magic always has a price. It's never
Yes.
just a free lunch. There is no free lunch. It's just you will be giving something up. So I love this idea. How long did it take to go from just a concept, this kind of idea that was in your head, to a finished product?
No, that's a great question. I'm going to have a two-part answer, and they're going to be very kind of dichotomous in the sense that they're not going to make sense. I've been thinking about the origin of Thorn for years, and where did he come from, and why would he want to do this? In terms of once I actually got the offer to write the short story from Shadowpaw Press, and I said, I'm going to write this origin story, I was able to write the entire short story, which is about 5,000 words in a little over a week. So in terms of once I committed to writing the story, about a week, but thinking about Thorn's origin and kind of the nuances of his thought process and who he was as a character, that's been under consideration for years.
Wow, I love that. I love that. So like when you were like at work or doing other stuff, were you always just kind of thinking about like, okay, next up for Thorn is this?
Yes, a little bit. So, in terms of where does the origin for the stories come from? Authors are always asked, where do your ideas come from? My ideas come from being a reader and very passionate about science fiction and fantasy, being a fan. And whenever I read a book or see a movie, most of the time I'm entertained and happy. But every once in a while, I will see a scene, a dialogue between two characters, and I think, I think they would be saying something else, or something else would be a priority. Or I'd see a bit of action or magic, and I think that's cool. But boy, it'd be cooler if he flipped this way and did his shooting this way, and change the action scene in my head. So the ideas for my stories and my books come from, I want to take something that I think is cool, but then make it more personal to me, but then also put my spin and my flavor on what I think would be interesting dialogue or interesting action. So I collect all of those ideas, and some of them are great, some of them are not great, and then I work with the ones that I think actually could move forward.
Excellent. Now, how did you come to hear of Shadowpaw Press?
No, so this is a great story as well. So when I published my debut novel, which is called the Path from Regret, that came out in 2023, I was looking for ways to increase exposure, get a bigger audience, and so I was looking for bloggers and podcasters to talk about it. And Edward Willett, he is a Canadian author. He also runs a podcast called The World Shapers. And I pitched him saying, I would love to be able to talk about my debut fantasy novel on your podcast. He was very gracious and said yes. So he's had the World Shapers interview for many, many years now, and has interviewed lots of big names in science fiction and fantasy. So I felt like I somehow got away with something I shouldn't have, because I'm this debut no-name author, and I'm sneaking in with some of the big names. My name's slotted between some of the big names. But anyway, he had an outstanding interview, and it was a great show. Was very grateful for that. And then come to find out afterwards, not only is he an author himself and he runs this podcast, but then not audiences, authors from his show, they are invited at the end of the year to contribute a short story to an anthology that he publishes. He has a small independent press called Shadowpaw Press that he runs, and then authors on his podcast show contribute short stories, and then he puts out an anthology every year. And so there's been four of them, and then when I went on for the interview, I would have been part of cohort 5. So he asked me, I obviously said yes right away, and so that's where the origin came from. That I will be part. I think there's almost 30 authors in this anthology. It's going to be over 400 pages, and that will be coming out in March of 2025. So in a couple months from now. And so I'll have The Magic That Cannot Be Undone as part of this Shapers of World Volume 5 anthology.
That's huge, man. That's really huge, and I love that you went on the show having no idea that that was going to happen. It's like, hey, I'm going to like get some like exposure and get some press, and oh, I can do this too.
Yes,
Awesome, that
exactly.
works too.
So that was an incredible bonus. So in terms of kind of a relationship working with Ed, he's been I feel incredibly generous for an author that is coming from a small independent press and is doing all the marketing and promotion and sales and stuff like that. They don't have a big 5 publisher pushing behind them.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, I think it's good to learn to do the stuff yourself because you can't wait for someone to kind of swoop in and save you. I think it's good to have that know-how. And, you kind of messaged me through a connection with another author. So, initiative, man, go for it. Definitely.
Absolutely, and I think that's the more that I've only been really seriously doing the writing and publishing game for the past, basically since the pandemic, which I think many authors have done,
Yep.
and realizing that network and community and kind of regional contacts are so important, and
Hmm.
that's really how I've been able to do many of my in-person events. Is I know a person who knows a person who's running an event, and making a connection that way. So a lot of the things that I write about in I'm reluctant to call it a blog, but my update section of my website is talking about reading local. So that's kind of the proponent or the advocacy that I do now is read local, read regional authors, small press authors, people that you might actually be able to run into at an event at your local bookstore or on the street. And I've been able to read some incredible books by people that have small press connections that you'll never see at Barnes and Noble. But I'm finding the stories to be just as entertaining as ones you could pull off the shelf.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah, dude. Yeah. Some of my favorite stories have been stuff by like small time authors who are kind of like new to the game. They don't have, as you mentioned, like the big five behind them, but they're still talented. They're really good.
Absolutely. And so that's what's been really neat about being through Apprentice House Press and now Shadowpaw Press is looking through their catalog and seeing what gems are just kind of waiting there to be discovered. And I think that's the cool part about readers in general and kind of readers of sci-fi and fantasy in particular is they're always looking for the next gem. Everyone's read the
Hmm.
big stuff you can get at Barnes and Noble. And so when you say, well, and that's, sometimes when I go on to say Reddit and say, all right, what are the hidden gems or what are the underappreciated authors? And so you might get some big names that you might not have heard from, but then you also get these regional and local authors that people are very passionate about and advocate for. And then those are the ones you say, I've never heard of this person. Let me go try it out.
Exactly. All right. Now we've talked about writers. Now, anyone in this collection that you have been like a fan of in the past, or maybe have become a new fan of?
Absolutely. So in the Shapers of Worlds Volume 5 anthology, there is one writer that I would advocate for or say his stories are great. His name is Brian Trent. And so he is a hard sci-fi writer. And so the book that I really enjoyed the most is called Red Space Rising, and it's about a galactic civil, well, not a galactic civil war, but a civil war between Mars and Earth when Mars was colonized, and then there's kind of the uh, fractionation of the two kind of governments and what happens when there's this war. But then the hero of the war doesn't remember winning it for his side, and so the question becomes what happened. And so the idea is of him trying to retrace what happened. What did he actually do to end the war? Why does it happen? And there's some memory alteration that comes into play, and he's not always sure he's working for the right side. Is he a double agent? Is he a double agent? So there's lots of kind of twists and turns about where are his true loyalties, and are the memories he's experiencing truly his? And so that's really all I want to say about it. But
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that's kind of the plot. That's what I'll say is about the plot. The thing that I think is really cool is all of the sci-fi tech. And so when people are always thinking about sci-fi, they want to know, okay, how cool are your laser guns? How cool are your cybernetics? How cool are your mental augments? And so he's got all sorts of really cool things. And the one thing that I'll say I think is one of the neatest things that was in his story, and I've seen this in other places, but the way he implements it is really cool. Is he calls it a blur modification, and essentially it's a cybernetic system that allows you to, for a short period of time, move at hyperspeed. So if you need to evade a bullet or cross a room in the blink of an eye, you can do that. And obviously that's very high wear and tear on a body, so you can't have it going constantly. But this blur mod allows the character to move at impossible speeds for very short time frames. And I think that's a very cool way to solve some problems.
Yes, definitely. I love that. Okay, okay. Red Space Rising. It's going on the list. I'm checking this one out. You sold me on this one. But let's talk a little more about your other two books. As you
Sure.
mentioned, The Path from Regret and The Magic of Deceit. What was it like though, going from like writing a novel to going like a short story where you have, as you mentioned, only like 5,000 words to write here?
It's actually a lot harder for me.
I'll
So
bet.
I first started my writing journey when I was 11 and got my first rejection letter when I was 11. So I've been
Oh my
trying to write and
God.
get published for a very, very long time. And so wrote through all high school and college. And, much like all writers, their writing journey, all they've done is collect rejection slips until they finally make the break. And so I made the switch again during the pandemic, like most folks, from short stories to novels because you had more time. And with a novel, you've got tons of time to develop character and world and setting and motivation. And so you have kind of that luxury of length. For a short story, you need to kind of distill all of that down to its very core components and get to where you need to be going, but make it flavorful, make it interesting in a much smaller word count. So I found that going from novels back to short stories was actually quite challenging.
Oh, I'll bet. Yeah, I hear that a lot. People say, "Yeah, so I had to do this, but like this." So it's definitely a switch. All right,
Exactly.
folks.
Yeah,
Well,
to go from 100,000 words down to five, that's
right. It's like,
it's
okay,
tough.
this is a bit different. Like you might think, oh, super easy, right? 5,000 words, you can do that in a couple of days. Like, yeah, but you got to put all those components, the beginning, middle, and end, everything that comes in between in this very small space.
Absolutely. And I think the reason that I was able to do it, I said before, I was able to write it in a week is because I had been thinking about it for such a long time. If I had gone in cold, I think it would have been even harder.
Yeah. Do you feel like having published like two books and now being part of this anthology, do you feel like you've arrived as a writer?
Not yet, because I think every writer wants that breakout where they feel like lots of people know about it. Right now, I still feel like I'm in the friends and family level of writing,
Yep.
and that's very much the kind of the local space or the hyper local space. And
Mhm.
so I think that the next step up would be regional. And so I'm in the Baltimore D.C. area. So if I could make it to say the Baltimore Comic Con or the DC Imaginarium Festival, things like that are bigger and regional, and being able to go there and be successful. I think for me that's the next step or the next goal. To say that I want a blockbuster and have a bestseller and do that, that's completely unreasonable for a single person with a small press. I mean, it does happen, but I think that for me, I've got a day job and I like my day job, so writing full time is not in the cards just yet. And so I think that next tier of being a successful regional writer is the next goal that I think for me is that's attainable.
Agreed. Yeah, I think you gotta be smart and like allow yourself to take these early steps. Some people do. Some people do, as you mentioned, have the breakout hit right off the bat, but that's really rare. So sometimes it's just the long way.
Right. I mean, the example that I'm thinking of off the top of my head is Andy Weir with The Martian. So that was going to be, or it was kind of a self-published book first to start, but it blew up with his writing group or his online community, and then I got picked up by a big five publisher, and then it became national bestseller in movies and all that stuff, and that really launched his career. But it started out as more or less a self-publishing project. So
Hmm.
that's an example of yes, it absolutely does happen, but I would argue it's relatively rare.
It is. It is. All right, folks. Well, we are coming down to the end of this conversation, but to wrap things up, the big question, Jeffrey, what's next for you?
What's next is I am writing my third novel. I'm about 50% done. I expect it to be complete in July or August of 2025. And then I've got an option clause in my contract for my previous book. So I'll be sending it to Apprentice House Press for a first look. And if things break my way and things go well, I would say in early 2026, I'm sorry, in late 2026 or early 2027, the third book would be coming out.
All right, all right. Well, folks, that brings this episode to a close. Jeffrey Gardner, thank you so much for joining me. And just to remind everyone, okay, so this is coming out in March through Shadowpaw Press, Shapers of Worlds, Volume 5. Check out his story, The Magic That Cannot Be Undone. And to learn more about the writer, you go to jgardnerauthor.com. Everything's there. Get his books, follow him on the socials, write reviews. Everything helps. And Jeffrey, thanks again, man, and looking forward to the next conversation.
Thank you very much. This was great.
All right, folks. Thank you once again for joining us, and we will see you all next time.